there's another new development that could be rattling global markets, especially oil markets, even more. Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen have now declared their own naval blockade, they say, against Saudi Arabia in the Bab el-Mandab Strait in the Red Sea. That's another critical international shipping channel and oil route. And also, there's new reporting just in today that the Houthis have begun broadcasting messages warning Saudi ships to stop traveling in the Red Sea. Joining me right now is retired Army Major General James Spider Marks. He's the head of geopolitical strategy for Academy Securities. It's good to see you, Spider. Let's talk about this. I mean, the Houthis now threatening the Bab el-Mandab Strait, declaring this blockade on Saudi ships from passing through. If this really does go into effect, if we now have a second major shipping channel that is threatened and thus, there will be disruption to it, what does that mean for the United States if this becomes a new front of this war?
Well, it's been a front in the engagement with the Houthis in the past, as we realize. Also, bear in mind the Saudis, over the course of about a decade, tried to eliminate the Houthis without success. Many would say it's difficult to try to bomb an organization back into the 14th century when they're already in the 14th century. So the Houthis have had an opportunity to really establish themselves over time. They've been quiet, as you know, over the past 4 or 5 months as a result of Epic Fury and their ability to stay in touch with Tehran, which is their primary lifeline for support, has been minimized as well. What this tells you is that they've been hunkering down, they have capacity, and they are now going to reach up and turn up the heat, obviously. The concern truly is, do they have the capacity to do that? Can the Houthis close the Bab el-Mandeb? Well, they've done it in the past, but it's been opened again because of the efforts of the United States, not with a lot of help from other allied partners. But there's an incentive for the Saudis certainly to be involved because the Saudis, have created a pipeline infrastructure, as you know, from the Gulf over to the Red Sea. This is the oil that's being pumped out. So that attempt to create an alternative and some resiliency and redundancy is now going to be threatened pretty significantly. So the U.S. has a presence. The Saudis have a capability. What is going to be done that's going to detract from Epic Fury if in case, if we are now on the front edge of a new engagement with Iran, will that alter that type of an attack profile? Those are the key issues that need to be addressed. So the Houthis can say a lot of things a priori. Right. Let's see what really happens. And then I guarantee you the Saudis will step up and the U.S. will certainly get involved as well.
Nick, the Iran-backed Houthi group in Yemen, as you know, has declared its own maritime blockade on Saudi shipping. This is a big deal. What's the fallout from this?
Yeah, the Houthis are essentially a proxy of the Iranians. The Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz. The Houthis are threatening to close the equivalent on the Red Sea, known as Bab el-Mandab. About 6 or 7% of the world's oil and energy supplies come out through Bab el-Mandab along the coast of Yemen. This is mostly Saudi oil that's pumped all the way across the Arabian Peninsula from the Strait of Hormuz, where it's blocked, and it comes out through the Red Sea. So this is a significant escalation. The Houthis are militarily ready for this moment. However, they have not taken or so far not acted upon this decision to block the Saudis. If they do, then we can expect an escalation in a response from the Saudis. That is almost unquestionable.
Bab el-Mandab Strait, it accounts for around 15% of traffic, maritime traffic. I mean, this is just such a huge risk. Countries are starting to really draw down their reserves. How worried should we be about the Houthis at this point?
Well, they haven't or at least they haven't enforced this blockade. But if they do, it's significant because this was the exit that Saudi Arabia had used to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, which we know has been either locked down or kind of open or kind of closed for about 5 months. They were basically transporting via pipeline and convoy the oil to the Red Sea and trying to get it out that way. And they were doing that very successfully. Somewhere around the order of 4 million barrels a day had been exiting through this other choke point that now the Houthis want to close off. And so that is a significant threat. Not the kind of threat that the Strait of Hormuz is, but when you compile these things, it gets to be pretty significant. Now, oil prices, it is worth mentioning, although they are up about $20 from their low point from a few weeks ago when the Strait of Hormuz was mostly open, we're still also around $25 or $30 below the high point for the war. So the market right now is kind of saying, okay, we think that this could be a problem. Maybe there's some room to rise, but we're not quite at the level that we are or we were just a few weeks ago. The reason for that is that, as you mentioned, there are these inventories. China has almost 2 billion barrels of oil in its inventory. It continues to draw down that, and that's sapped demand for oil imports. So the big picture is this is a bigger problem today than we had yesterday, but still the market thinks that it can be managed, at least for the time being.
I want to bring in Dina Esfandiari, Middle East geoeconomics lead for Bloomberg Economics. Dina, really good to have you with us. I want to start off with something you wrote on X, and you say this: the Houthis have announced a blockade of Saudi, framing it as a domestic issue. The move is intended to give them wiggle room to escalate from targeting Saudi ships only to expanding to wider disruption in the Red Sea. And Dina, we also know that the Houthis have already started broadcasting messages to vessels, putting out warnings as well. I mean, this could be another huge risk on global oil supply. How are you analyzing some of the scenarios that could play out in the next couple of days?
Absolutely. This is really significant, and it's really significant now because so much of the oil that was going through the Straits of Hormuz has now been diverted towards the Red Sea. The Saudis in particular have done that, reaching maximum capacity in their east-west pipeline. So that means that all of that oil that was going through Hormuz is now going to the Red Sea. The Houthis have been very careful to give themselves space. So they've now come out and said that they will target all ships that go in and out, that dock in and out of Saudi ports. But of course, how much they implement that threat is what everybody's going to be watching, because they could target just Saudi ships to begin with. They could go much bigger. At the end of the day, what matters is that they've made this threat. And ultimately, because they've done this in the past before, that threat is credible, and that's enough to scare a lot of people off.
Yeah, I mean, look, the wider issue here is what we're seeing from the US side, and the Pentagon is saying nearly 100 US troops were injured in the last 2 weeks. We know that Hegseth is expected to face senators today and, answer questions around the fact that they need more money for this war. From a Tehran perspective, they're reading into this. They're looking very closely at the US strategy right now. And I guess who's going to buckle first?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The problem is that both sides right now appear to be locked in an escalatory spiral. The Iranians want to make sure that their red lines are clear, and the main red line really is their control over the Strait of Hormuz. The US, in turn, also wants to be sure that its red line is clear, and that red line is that Iran can't control the Strait of Hormuz. So the two are basically locked in this exchange. It's an incrementally increasing exchange in the sense that now it's targeting more infrastructure, both in Iran and in the rest of the region. That's likely to increase over the course of the next few days. Every time it gets worse, it becomes harder to find an off-ramp for both sides, and that's the critical issue.
So, look, the United States has reiterated for many months now, frankly, that they have been able to degrade a significant number of Iran's military capabilities as well as missile launches. Iran, in the meantime, targeting Gulf states, specifically over the past 10 days, and also releasing footage of their missile launches and drone launch sites. What capabilities do we know, Iran still has at this point?
Well, it's really hard to say exactly, but what is sure is that yes, the US has degraded some of Iran's capabilities, but no, that hasn't been enough to prevent Iran from continuing its attacks. And not only has Iran been able to continue its attacks in the Strait, largely because that doesn't require much, frankly. It requires some drones, it requires some rubber boats with guns or explosive devices. So controlling the Strait from Tehran's perspective is really easy. The thing that's been more interesting to watch is Iran's ability to target US bases and US personnel in the wider region, including in Jordan. The US had moved some of its troops into Jordan away from the Gulf Arab states in order to move them away from Iran, and Iran has still been able to target them. That is something that's really quite worrying.